We talked about food last week. Did anybody have any questions about the processed foods before I move on? Like, are you clear on what a processed food is and why it is so dangerous for us? Just a show of hands, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on then. That sounds great. So on Monday, we were talking about food and food habits and kind of improving how we eat. And, it may seem a little bit difficult at first. I understand. It was difficult when I did that. But habits take a long time to develop. And with us here tonight, we have a special guest speaker, Elizabeth Markie, who is going to be sharing with us how the brain forms habits and how a mindfulness-based approach to eating can help us rewire our brains. So, good evening, Elizabeth. How are you today?
I'm great. It's great to be here. And hi, everybody.
So happy to have you with us. I'm really looking forward to your presentation. But before you do, I just want to give a little introduction so everybody knows your background and where you're coming from. And I'm going to read this. Sorry. So Elizabeth Markie is a qualified mindfulness-based behavior and habit change facilitator for the Unwinding Anxiety, Eating Right Now, and Craving to Quit programs developed by Dr. Jud Brewer. Certified by the Academy of Neuroscience in Brain Health, as well as the NeuroLeadership Institute as a brain-based coach and a HeartMath Resilience trainer, she has a passion for sharing her knowledge of how the brain works. All three of the brains: head, heart, and gut. So without further ado, I'm going to give the platform to you, Elizabeth.
Great. Thank you, Evey. So, yeah, I have a huge passion for sharing how the brain works. And I know that you're learning and have an understanding of the biology of your body as it relates to eating and food and what happens to your body. But I also think it's important to understand how your brain works in relation to your eating habits or anything that you do, actually. So I'm going to share my screen, and I've got a little bit of some slides. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions. We'll do a Q&A afterwards as well, but I don't have too many slides, and I'll try not to talk too fast. Sometimes I get so passionate that I'm... So there's one thing in particular that I share with everybody first off in understanding how their brain works, not just related to habits, but to every single day of your life. The brain only has one organizing principle, and it is to respond to either threat or reward. And it's a matter of survival. So 5 to 6 times per second, your brain non-consciously is surveying your environment and, first of all, looking for threat in the environment. That's why we tend to have a negativity bias. And so if you think about way back, the threat was the mountain lion, right? So we're always looking for the mountain lion for survival. And then we also look towards reward. So the berry bush was also critical for survival. And so those were sort of the two examples of how that foundation of the organizing principle works. However, in today's environment, it's changed a lot. We don't often see those mountain lions, and we go to the grocery store to find the berry bush. But today's threat really is so much of our environment, whether it's media-induced or talking to your boss at work or trying to get to work on time and driving through the traffic, or your own thinking about threats you might have about a conversation you're about to have somebody that might be uncomfortable for you. And today's rewards are much more plentiful than the berry bush. We've got burgers and fries and pizza and processed foods, right? But this concept of responding to threat or reward is really how we form associations and habits in particular, and our memory. So if we know that the mountain lion is to the left of the cave when we came out, we will remember that and we'll store it in our memory so that we don't go to the left when we get up in the morning, that we go to the right to get to the berry bush. And so with that said, in forming habit loops, and most people these days have heard about the process of a habit loop. But when we form a habit, it's really the brain's way of being efficient, because I think at this point they estimate that 94 to 96% of what we do on a day-to-day basis is really habit. We often think of habits as bad habits, biting our nails, or any of those type of things, but it really applies to everything we do, because otherwise we'd have to pay so much attention to what we're doing that we wouldn't be able to learn new things or really function as well. And one of the things to remember when a habit emerges, the brain stops fully participating, because the habit is freeing up space so that the brain can focus on new things in your environment. But a habit loop is formed usually with a cue or a trigger in the environment. And so I have an example here of learning to brush your teeth. Perhaps it's been so long and so habitual for you, you don't remember. Or maybe you've taught your children or grandchildren how to brush their teeth lately. But let's say the cue would be when you wake up in the morning or before you go to bed at night. And so then the routine is to brush your teeth. And the reward is your mouth feels better, your breath is cleaner. And so you continue to do that. And that becomes so ingrained that now you can probably stand in your closet and pick out what you want to wear and not even think about the fact that you're brushing your teeth. Whereas when you were learning, you looked in the mirror and you paid attention to how much toothpaste you put on. Driving a car would be the same thing. Now you can listen to the radio while driving the car. Half the time you don't even remember how you got there when you were driving the car. But the brain does stop participating fully. And as a result, we're often very unaware of the habits that we have. I remember when I first started learning about the brain and habits, I did kind of two things to test myself. In my shower, I had my shampoo on one part and the conditioner on the other. And so I switched them. And for the first couple times I went to wash my hair, I paid attention. I had to look at what I was getting to put on my hair. The next thing I knew, I was washing my hair with conditioner. And so it's just a mindless process. Another time I decided I was going to take my son to school a different way. And so I told him that I was working on habits and things I just didn't even think about, and that we were going to start going a new way to school. And so the first 4 days we went the new way to school. And then day 5, all of a sudden he's in his car seat and he says, "Mom, you're going the wrong way." "No, I'm not." I'm real defensive. He's like, "No, Mom, you're going the wrong way." I went right back to the old way of doing it without even thinking about it. So it's a non-conscious habit loop that we get into. So I thought I'd relate something here to food, and just to be transparent, I used to have a huge thing about potato chips, a bad habit with potato chips. And when I started looking for, why do I move towards potato chips in what instances? I found that, sometimes it was because I was hungry, but quite honestly, it wasn't always because I was hungry. Typically, I found that if I was stressed, I would go to a potato chip. If I was bored, maybe I was watching television, I wasn't even aware that I wasn't just having 1 or 2 potato chips. The next thing I knew, I'd have the whole bag of potato chips. I wanted to have a glass of wine, I'd have potato chips with it. And then also, if I was tired, maybe I just didn't feel like fixing anything else, I'd have a potato chip. And so, the reward for me was I like the taste of it. I like the sound of potato chips, they're crunchy. And a lot of times we have a non-conscious memory attached that we're not even aware of. So potato chips, it might have been, maybe the first time I had them, it was with a really great hamburger or something, or it was at a party where there was lots of people and put out chips and dips. But the other thing too, is I mentioned on the other side, I was tired. When we're tired, the conscious part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is referred to as our executive brain, where we make decisions and pay attention and learn from. When we're tired, that prefrontal cortex dims down or even shuts down. And we tend to move into habits more frequently then, because it's non-conscious, it's just automatic behavior. But one of the things, as we go back to the operating principle of threat or reward, is some of you may be familiar with reward-based learning. It's pretty typical. Somebody does something good and you say, "What? Oh, that was great. Thank you for doing that." And so they'll do it again. Or maybe in school, they got a star or a sticker. or even an A instead of a C because they studied really hard. So we move towards reward and we move away for threat. But this reward-based learning is really the foundational principle for behavior change as it relates to a mindfulness approach. And so with that said, if we start to look at the fact that the brain formed that habit because it thought it was getting a reward, that's why we stored that information. That's why we know where the berry bush is. However, there are behaviors that get formed that in the long run, as they become habits, may no longer serve us. When we find out that that berry bush is now added sugar to it and we're having it in a muffin, that's a very different reward. And so the key is to start looking at the end, the reward as a result. What is the real result I'm getting from this? And so you can map out your habits using this habit mapper. This habit mapper comes from Dr. Jud Brewer's program, the 3 that I facilitate: Eat Right Now, Unwinding Anxiety, and Craving to Quit. And you actually start to identify your triggers. Well, you start with your behavior, right? What is it you want to change? And so then you look to identify what your triggers are. And as I mentioned earlier, with my potato chips, I was stressed, bored, TV, tired. My behavior was potato chips. And then if I looked at the actual results versus the rewards, I was gaining weight. I didn't really even taste the potato chips after potato chip number 2. And after I consumed potato chips, I felt really bad about it. I felt disappointed in myself because what we've learned about habits is that willpower does not work. And quite honestly, your triggers, the first approach towards changing habits based on a habit loop model was to remove the triggers, right? So if it was because you were in the presence of someone else or whatever, you'd start to remove those things, just like taking the item out of the cabinet, right? You can take the item out of the cabinet, but you can always go to the store again. So removing the triggers, it can be helpful, but it really does not in the long run allow for long-term habit change. People usually will fall back into previous habits. So using a mindfulness-based approach really means that while we're in the behavior itself, we start to ask ourselves, what am I getting from this? What are the results? It's not to say stop the behavior right now or don't do it or hide from it. It's actually encouraging you to participate in it and in the moment start to ask yourself, because when you're doing that, you're actually forming a stage of disenchantment and you're updating the brain's reward center. And over a period of time, and sometimes it can be within just a sudden realization of, oh my God, this is killing me. Right? And it's so strong that you'll shift the behavior. But typically, I have found it's usually, I know it took me probably about 3 weeks to get over the potato chips, because instead of not buying them, I had them. I'd go to reach for them. I might be tasting, all of a sudden I'd realize in the middle, I wouldn't chastise myself. Mindfulness is about really non-judgmental awareness, and it's about that awareness. So all of a sudden, as I'm putting the chip in my mouth, I'm thinking, what am I really getting from this? And how many have I just had? And then you start for me, started to cut back. And then all of a sudden, it was almost like overnight, but it wasn't the next day. I didn't even want a potato chip anymore. It wasn't that I even had to hide them from myself. They can be in the house now, and I just don't want them. So in the Craving to Quit program and in the Eat Right Now, all 3 programs actually, we use a model for habit change relating it to gears, like the gears of a car or a bicycle. First gear is that awareness of a habit loop. Sometimes we don't even realize that we have a habit going on. We're just doing it on autopilot, I guess is what we refer to that too. So first gear is when you have an awareness, taking that habit mapper form of the 3 circles and just start looking at some of the things that you do on a regular basis and mapping out your habits. Second gear is when you start to update that reward center of your brain by having disillusionment around what that perceived reward was. And so it's really just changing the brain's reward center is what you're doing. And third gear is when you like break, you break free of that getting caught up. You have a much greater awareness, whether you've substituted, perhaps you're going to, a lot of times people say, well, substitute a piece of chocolate for a carrot, or I don't know, that sounds horrible. But, even in a behavior, when you start to become more mindful, that almost in itself is a substitute. That awareness with curiosity, there is something about that where that behavior shifts. And when you haven't had that fifth potato chip, there is a reward in that. And so it shifts, and that's a sort of, we call it a bigger, better offer. So it doesn't always have to be about a substitution. Behavior is the substitution itself, not doing it. So the key really is paying attention. Are you mindful, or are you so, your mind's so full that you're not paying attention? And it's attention that changes the brain. Because as I said before, 94 to 96% of what we do, we are on autopilot, and we're not updating the brain's reward center. We're doing the same thing over and over again. And we know that, I guess it's been about 15 years ago, the discovery of neuroplasticity, which was just, the scientifically validating the fact that the brain changes. Most people would say, well, that's just my personality. Well, we know today that the brain changes over time. And yes, as we're older, it takes a little bit longer because we've been doing things for a long time. And that information and how we behaved is hardwired. But you can rewrite that wiring that's in your brain. You can change your brain. It does take motivation, awareness, and effort. It's not going to happen just after one time. Just like you created a habit by doing something over and over again, you have to do the same thing to shift that habit and change your brain for something different. But I mentioned before that the programs Eat Right Now, Unwinding Anxiety, and Craving to Quit, they're actually a digital app. You can download them. And there's daily modules. I think it's a 6-week program. You can do it without me, without a coach. You can do it with just what's on the app, but I would recommend any of them. And there are groups around available. There's also a community available through those apps for questions or support. The apps give you mindfulness-based exercises to start to change your brain, to become more aware, even just a matter of, getting quiet for about a minute and start to become aware of the sounds around you or movement around you. The brain spends a tremendous amount of time either thinking about the past or trying to predict the future. And again, that's a survival mechanism for the brain, but it's impossible to predict the future because the only thing the brain knows is from the past. So training your brain to become more present and in the moment is a process, but there are practices that you can do to start to become more aware so that you're not eating a whole bag of potato chips. That's just the information on how to find me, but I'd love to answer any questions you might have. I know I moved through that pretty quickly, but any questions about the brain, habits, neuroplasticity, mindfulness? A lot of people think mindfulness is meditation. It's not. There are mindful meditations. Mindfulness is just really a process of training the brain to become more aware in the moment.
Well, I can add something.
Sure.
That, okay, so my problem is like after dinner, I always want something sweet. So I want to break that habit. So I don't know, like I'm kind of still unclear. So I'm supposed to think about like not having it. Like
No.
how would I change? Okay.
Yeah. So no, I would ask you, so when you're having chocolate,
Yeah,
what are you getting from that? What is the result?
it tastes good.
Sure.
Yeah. And it's like a closure to dinner. Like, okay, I'm done now eating for the night, So.
Okay. And so why do you want to change that habit?
Well, I don't want too much sugar. I know it's not good to have a lot of chocolate. Like if I have one piece, that's good. But if, I have more than one, then, that's not as good. So how would I change that?
Do you typically have more than one piece?
Yeah, like I can have, well, like then I start like, oh, let me have some chocolate after lunch. And, I don't know. I'm just trying to like help, like not having so many sweets after my meals.
Right.
Like yeah, like I guess I could change it by having fruit or something instead.
Well, actually, if you think about it, I think what I hear you saying is that you'd be satisfied if you had just one piece.
Yeah.
But where you're having some habitual behavior and tendencies is that you typically have more than one piece, just like I had more than one potato chip.
Right. Yeah.
And then it's not just after dinner, then you find yourself doing it at lunch. Right.
Yeah.
So, but I also heard you say that the actual result, the reward is it tastes good. But what I heard you say the result is that you're getting too much sugar. And
yeah.
And what is that too much sugar also doing to you?
Well, I know it's bad for your body. I don't know. I guess you have to look long term. Like, they keep saying sugar is bad for you and stuff. So is that what you got to just keep thinking? Like, okay, it's bad for my joints, or
do you feel it in your joints?
Yeah, I have like weak knees.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I have a lot of inflammation there. So I don't know. I guess, I know like I try not to have gluten and try to cut down on the sugar. So
I can,
I
what I hear you saying is that you actually can feel a negative effect on your body. Your joints hurt.
Yeah.
You're getting too much sugar.
Yeah. And it's not right away. Like I'd feel better if I didn't have it. It's more long term. So that's where it's hard to like process, like, okay, like don't have it,
Right. So I know you're saying long term, and that's hard to see. What are the short term effects that you see? Do you feel good about yourself after you've had several pieces, or would
yeah. I mean, yeah, like I'm like, okay, I'm done now for the night, and I don't eat after that, after I have, my sweets or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but if you're trying to change that behavior, I also hear you saying that you're wishing you didn't do that.
yeah.
So there's a little bit of discomfort there where you don't feel as good about
sometimes yourself. I can really control myself, but other nights, like you said, like you're bored or you're watching TV or something like that. So, I don't know, how would I change that behavior?
Yeah. So what you would do is sort of what we just did just now while you're eating that chocolate, and you can do it in reflection as well, quite honestly. But
okay.
I would suggest that you do it while you're in the behavior, not because, and not saying that you should put it down and stop and do it. I'm saying that while you're eating that chocolate and it may be tasting good, that you actually continue to ask yourself right then, what am I really getting from this? What is the result of me doing this? And, it's okay to have one piece. That's okay.
Yeah. I know.
What I hear you saying is that you don't want to have multiple pieces. So would you feel satisfied with yourself if you were able to at least cut it down to one piece?
Yeah, that's what I should. I mean, I was just talking earlier, like I eat dark chocolate almonds. So if I have a couple, that's okay, I know. But sometimes I was like, oh, grab some more, So that's why I gotta need a control, is try to cut down.
Yeah. And that's, one of the approaches with a mindfulness behavior piece is that we look at the behavior non-judgmentally, right? But with curiosity, what am I really getting from this? And not so much, why do I do it? That's kind of asking with a crooked why. It doesn't really matter. We just know we're doing it. But really, what are the results, whether they're long-term or not? And the more we can update the brain, and it might be, you might ask yourself that 5 times and come up with different answers, or it might take 10 times. But trust me, you will start to see a reduction in that behavior because you're updating, just like a computer. When you reboot your computer and it's got new software in it, you're updating the brain's reward center each time you become more aware and you're not doing something on autopilot.